It seems barely a day passes now without some big-name person warning of imminent collapse. The latest is Alan Greenspan. In an interview on Thursday, he told Fox News that Venezuela is now under martial law and that America is next. He said that what was happening in Venezuela was inevitably going to take place in the US. I agree with this. In fact, we said this exact thing just last week with our article, Venezuela Descends into Chaos, Europe and US Next. Funny enough, a few brainwashed sheeple said we were crazy for saying it. Now Greenspan has said the same thing. Is he crazy? Actually, don't answer that. But while we agree with Greenspan that crisis is coming to the US, that's where our agreement ends. We say it's coming to the US because the conditions in the US are not that much different than Venezuela, and the globalist plan is to turn the entire world into Venezuela. Greenspan, on the other hand, is already trying to divert attention from the real cause of Venezuela's problems, the government and central banking. Instead, he explained that the reason the US would end up like Venezuela involved a global problem of a shortage of productivity growth. It is this lack of productive growth that creates and expands an economic crisis, he claimed. This is Greenspeak at its finest. The problems in Venezuela aren't due to an extreme socialist government and a Keynesian money-printing central bank, according to him. No, the problem is just that things aren't growing fast enough. Well, to an extent that's true. Things aren't growing at all in Venezuela. In fact, they're imploding at a rate I've never personally witnessed before. But that isn't the root cause of the problem. The reason why Venezuela's economy isn't growing is because of the government and the central bank. Of course, you'll never hear a central bankster admit that. The problem is never them. It's always some obtuse economic buzz phrase like a lack of productivity growth. Greenspan continued by downplaying the role of central banking and government in the Venezuelan disaster. He then focused on the Federal Reserve and continued his lying. He said what the Fed did now was less important than what the markets did. While more money was available, actual production was not. Too many older people and too few resources. That was the problem. This is how Greenspan is explaining the expanding crisis of debt, socialism, and price inflation. It's coming from lack of productivity. Additionally, older workers prefer to be recipients of social benefits, and this also has a negative impact on productivity, he claimed. He warned that if the US, for instance, could not move productivity up from around 2%, social benefits and other obligations start to become impossible to fund. So once again, the problem isn't that the government created a Ponzi scheme we call socialist insecurity. The problem is that the markets aren't creating enough wealth to fund said Ponzi scheme. And that necessary growth is impossible. Between central bank monetary manipulation, managed trade, regulatory demands, and currency debasement, modern Western economies are barely functioning at all. Only the largest multinationals can manage to survive competitively in such an environment, and even many of them are not exactly thriving. Even Coca-Cola has had to pull out of Venezuela, and now Lufthansa has cut flights to the country. Greenspan wants to blame the West's industrial slump on a lack of productivity and growth. This is propaganda, and he knows it. And if he doesn't know it, then he's drank too much Keynesian Kool-Aid. Go home, Greenspan. You're drunk. The main cause of ruin over time is central bank money debasement, not some mysterious missing growth. And government generally makes things worse via regulations, taxation, and debt. Greenspan should know this. He's not a stupid man. But Greenspan is part of the central banking clique. He does what he's told to do. And he's obviously supposed to make sure that people don't blame central banking, regulations, and other government activities for the perma-depression that is now taking place in Venezuela, Latin America, Asia, China, and the West. There is, in fact, worse to come, as we have often pointed out. This year, Jubilee 2016, is a building year for world government. The European Union, for instance, is creating a pan-European army and is also giving all European residents tax ID numbers. And China is adding the yuan to the International Monetary Fund's SDR currency basket on October 1st, just the day before the Jubilee year ends on October 2nd. Things aren't going to get any better in 2016, only worse. The idea is obviously to create convulsive economic chaos that will help usher in a new economic order. In the meantime, Greenspan is supposed to distract your attention. I went to Venezuela recently, as you probably know, and predicted just what Greenspan is talking about. But unlike Greenspan, I blame the problems that Venezuela is having on an oppressive government and destructive central bank policies. That's obvious to anyone who looks at Venezuela without an agenda. But Greenspan and his crowd have an agenda. They want globalism, and they want it soon. And they will mislead, cheat, and destroy to get what they want. I'm proud to say that the Dollar Vigilante, along with some other alternative financial publications, stands in their way. If you want to track their lies on a regular basis and then figure out what you need to do to protect yourself and even profit from their agenda, I'd urge you to sign up for the Dollar Vigilante newsletter at dollarvigilante.com/subscribe. We've now had George Soros, Carl Icahn, Stanley Druckenmiller, Jim Rogers, the IMF, and the World Bank warn that we are on the verge of a crisis of biblical proportions. Greenspan even said that what is happening in Venezuela, complete with martial law, will come to the U.S. At what point do you start to listen and begin to protect yourself?